Voreth Sen had not run in 11 years. Tessarine diplomats did not run. Running implied urgency, and urgency implied a failure of anticipation, and failure of anticipation was, in the social architecture of Tessarine political life, roughly equivalent to announcing at a formal dinner that one had soiled oneself. So when Voreth's legs began churning beneath his ceremonial silks, driving his elongated frame through the maintenance corridors of Conclave Station at what he could only describe as an undignified sprint, the shame burned worse than his lungs. Behind him, the Gethori enforcers were not burdened by shame. They were burdened by body armor, pulse lances, and the sincere intention of putting several holes through his thorax. A bolt of compressed plasma kissed the wall beside his left ear. The composite paneling blistered and popped, throwing specks of molten material against his neck. Voreth did not look back. Looking back would require his brain to process information his brain did not want. He rounded a junction, slammed his shoulder against a service hatch, and tumbled through it into a cargo transit corridor that smelled of lubricant and regret. The transit corridor was dim, emergency lighting only. That meant something had gone wrong with the station's power grid on this level, or something had gone right for whoever was manipulating it. Voreth did not have time to determine which. He had time only to notice that the corridor was not empty. A human woman sat on a cargo crate roughly 10 meters ahead, legs crossed at the ankle, chewing on something. She wore a maintenance jumpsuit that was clean in the specific way that suggested it had been put on recently and never actually used for maintenance. Her hair was pulled back. She was not armed, or at least not armed in any way Voreth could see, which with humans frequently meant nothing. She looked at him. She looked at the service hatch he had just fallen through. She looked back at him. "You're early," she said. "We had you at another 4 minutes." Voreth's vocal membrane fluttered. "Who are you?" "Lena Vasic, Cultural Liaison, Earth Diplomatic Service. Formerly assigned to the conclave reception delegation you described as," she appeared to think, "a troupe of enthusiastic performers whose grasp of real statecraft would embarrass a provincial dinner theater." She chewed again. "It was some kind of dried fruit. That was you, right? 3 days ago in the Grand Forum. Got quite the laugh." The hatch behind Voreth rattled, heavy footsteps. The Gethori were not far. "Ms. Vasic, I am currently being pursued by armed individuals who intend to kill me." "Yeah," she said, "we know." She stood, brushed off her jumpsuit and pointed down the corridor. "This way. Stay behind me, don't touch the walls on the left side, and when we get to the junction, do exactly what I tell you, not approximately. Not your interpretation of what I said filtered through whatever Tessarine social hierarchy tells you my words actually mean. Exactly." Voreth Sen, first consul of the Tessarine diplomatic enclave, ambassador extraordinary to the conclave of settled worlds, a being who had spent his career ensuring that no one of inferior station ever told him what to do, looked at the service hatch buckling behind him, and followed the human woman down the corridor without a word. This was, he would later reflect, the first correct decision he had made in 3 days. 3 days earlier, the situation had been entirely different. 3 days earlier, Voreth Sen had been the most important person in the Grand Forum, and the humans had been a joke. The conclave of settled worlds met once every cycle to renegotiate trade compacts, arbitrate territorial disputes, and remind every species present that interstellar diplomacy was a game played by adults with centuries of institutional memory. The Tessarine had been playing it for 1800 years, the Kravath for 1200, the Gethori, bless their armored hearts, for 600, and they still occasionally threatened to eat someone at the table when negotiations stalled. The humans had been playing it for 47 years. 47 years. Voreth could still taste the amusement. The human delegation had arrived with a team of 9 and had submitted a formal request to renegotiate the mineral extraction compact governing the Tenari corridor, a trade zone that the Tessarine had controlled since before humans had achieved atmospheric exit. The audacity was either admirable or pathetic, and Voreth had decided publicly that it was pathetic. "They're performers," he had said, standing before the assembled delegates in the grand forum, his silks catching the light from the orbital window behind him. "Enthusiastic, certainly, committed to their roles without question, but performers nonetheless. They have memorized the words of diplomacy without understanding the language. They have studied the choreography without hearing the music." To grant them standing in a renegotiation of the Tenari Compact would be to invite a provincial dinner theater to restage a classical opera. The notes would be present, the art would not. The forum had laughed. Not all of them. The Cravathe attaché had kept her face still, and the Olin observer had been characteristically impossible to read, but enough. Enough to carry the motion. The humans' request was tabled, their delegation politely redirected to a subcommittee that dealt with emerging species integration, and their lead negotiator, a woman named Harriet Chen, had listened to the entire speech with an expression that Voreth had interpreted as humiliation. He now understood it had been patience. The first sign that something was wrong came 18 hours after the vote. Voreth received a priority communication from the Tessarine Intelligence Bureau informing him that the Gethori Trade Minister, Commandant Rithik, had filed a sealed motion to revoke the Tessarine exclusive rights to the Tenari corridor. Not renegotiate, revoke. This was, diplomatically speaking, a declaration of war without the courtesy of actually declaring war. Voreth's first instinct was to contact Rithik directly. They had a working relationship, not warm but functional, built on 17 years of carefully managed mutual interest. Rithik controlled Gethori military transit through the corridor. Voreth controlled the extraction licenses. Neither could operate without the other. It was elegant. It was stable. Rithik's office informed Voreth that the commandant was unavailable. His second instinct was to call his own intelligence chief, a meticulous Tessarine named Daresh, who had spent 3 decades mapping the political allegiances of every significant figure at the conclave. Daresh would know what had shifted. Daresh told him 3 things, each worse than the last. First, the Gethori motion had the backing of the Yanari trade bloc, which meant 4 additional votes on the conclave floor. That was enough to force a hearing. Second, the sealed motion included evidence fabricated, Voreth assumed, suggesting that Tessarine extraction operations in the Tenari corridor had been systematically underreporting yields to avoid conclave revenue-sharing obligations. Third, the evidence was not fabricated, it was real. And it had come from inside Voreth's own delegation. Someone on his staff had leaked accurate financial records to the Gethori. Voreth spent the next 6 hours in a state of controlled fury, methodically reviewing his delegation's access logs, communication records, and security clearances. He found the leak at hour 5. A junior analyst named Toril, who had been with the delegation for 2 years, and who had, it transpired, been in communication with a Gethori intelligence operative for the past 4 months. He found something else at hour 6. Toril's communications had been routed through a relay node registered to a human commercial shipping company called Meridian Freight. The humans. Voreth's contempt crystallized into something harder. Not only were the humans performers, they were saboteurs. They had been rejected from the Tenari negotiations, and their response was to funnel Tessarine secrets to the Gethori as an act of petty revenge. The dinner theater metaphor had been too generous. This was vandalism. He summoned Harriet Chen to his offices. She came alone, which Voreth noted as either bravery or ignorance. She was a small woman by any species standard, with short gray hair and unremarkable features, and the kind of plain civilian attire that suggested she had dressed for a shuttle commute, not a diplomatic confrontation. She sat in the chair across from his desk and folded her hands. "Ambassador Sen," she said, "thank you for the invitation." Ms. Chen, I will be direct. Your people have been routing intelligence to the Gethori through a commercial front called Meridian Freight. One of my analysts has been compromised. The resulting data has been weaponized against my delegation in a sealed motion that threatens 18 centuries of Tessarine treaty rights. I want to know why. Harriet Chen looked at him. Her expression was the same one she had worn in the Grand Forum. Voreth still read it as humiliation. Ambassador, she said, I'm not familiar with any operation involving your analyst, but I can tell you that Meridian Freight is not affiliated with the Earth Diplomatic Service. It is a human company. There are 800,000 human commercial entities registered in conclave space. I don't oversee freight logistics. You expect me to believe this is a coincidence. I expect you to investigate it, she said, thoroughly, before you decide who your friends are. She left. Voreth decided she was lying because the alternative that he had been wrong was not something Vorethsen did. He went to the Gethari instead. This was, he would later understand, the second critical error. The first had been the speech. The second was walking into Commandant Rithik's office and attempting to negotiate a private resolution. Rithik's office was aboard the Gethori delegation cruiser, a vessel that bristled with weapons the way a Tessarine bristled with diplomatic credentials. The commandant received him in what Rithik called a meeting room and what Voreth's security training called a kill box. One entrance, no windows, walls reinforced to contain weapons discharge. Rithik was enormous, even by Gethori standards. The crustacean species carried their age in the thickness of their carapace, and Rithik's was scored with a century of marks. He sat across from Voreth like a siege wall with opinions. First Consul, Rithik said, you honor me. Commandant, I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the Tenari motion. No misunderstanding. Your delegation has been stealing from the conclave for 11 years. The records are clear. The records were obtained through espionage. They were obtained through a concerned party who approached us with evidence of wrongdoing. The method of acquisition does not alter the content. Voreth leaned forward. Commandant, I am prepared to discuss a revised revenue-sharing arrangement that would address the conclave's concerns while preserving the existing compact framework. A negotiated adjustment rather than a unilateral revocation. It would benefit both our delegations. Rithik's mandibles clicked. Among the Gethari, this was either amusement or the precursor to violence. First Consul, the compact will be revoked. The hearing is scheduled. The votes are counted. What I am prepared to discuss is whether the revocation includes a formal censure of your delegation, which would end your career, or whether it proceeds as a simple administrative correction. The difference depends on your cooperation. My cooperation in what? You will endorse the Gethari candidate for corridor oversight, publicly, in the forum. You will state that the Tessarine delegation accepts the findings and supports a transition of authority. In exchange, no censure. Your career survives. Voreth stared at him. 1,800 years of Tessarine treaty rights, and Rithik was offering him a deal like a market vendor, offering a discount on bruised fruit. And if I refuse? Rithik's mandibles clicked again. Definitely amusement. Then the censure motion proceeds. The evidence is presented publicly, and the conclave learns that the Tessarine have been skimming from the common fund for over a decade. Your government recalls you. Your name becomes a cautionary tale, and the corridor transfers to Gethori control regardless. Voreth had walked into that room believing he held cards. He walked out understanding that every card in his hand had been dealt by someone else. He returned to his quarters and found a message waiting on his personal terminal. Text only, no routing signature, no sender identification. It read, the Gethari didn't find your analyst. We showed them where to look, but we didn't give them the records, someone else did. If you want to know who, meet us at Docking Bay 47, Sublevel 3 at 200 station time. Come alone. H. Chen. Voreth's instinct said trap. His intelligence training said trap. Every fiber of Tessarine diplomatic doctrine said that when humans offered help, it was because they wanted something, and what they wanted would cost more than what they offered. But Rithik's deal was not a deal. It was a surrender, and Voreth's own intelligence service had failed to detect the leak until the damage was done. If Chen had information he did not, refusing to hear it would be a third error, and Voreth could not afford a third. He went. Docking Bay 47, Sublevel 3, was a maintenance alcove attached to a decommissioned cargo berth. It smelled of coolant and old packing material. Harriet Chen was there, along with two other humans Voreth did not recognize. A tall man with a shaved head and the build of someone who had spent time in low-gravity environments, and a younger woman with dark skin, and a datapad who looked at Voreth the way an engineer looks at a problem. "Thank you for coming," Chen said. "You said someone gave the Gethari my delegation's records. If not your people, then who?" "Sit down, Ambassador." There was a crate. Voreth did not sit on crates, he sat on the crate. "The leak in your delegation, Toril, was real, but Toril didn't go to the Gethari. Toril went to us. We've been in contact with him for 3 months, building a picture of the Tenari extraction irregularities. Not to use against you. To understand the corridor's actual economics, because the official numbers never made sense, and we needed accurate data to make our renegotiation case." Voreth's vocal membrane tightened. "You recruited my analyst." "We asked him questions. He answered them. He wasn't paid, wasn't coerced, and wasn't promised anything. He was a junior analyst who believed the extraction irregularities were going to come out eventually and wanted to be on the right side of the table when they did. He was right about the first part." "Then how did the Gethari obtain the records?" The woman with the datapad, Lena Vasic, Voreth would learn later, turned the pad toward him. On it was a communication log showing a series of encrypted transmissions between a node inside the Tessarine delegation's own network and a Gethari intelligence server. The transmissions had not come from Toril's terminal. They had come from Daresh's. Voreth stared at the screen. Daresh, his intelligence chief, the meticulous, careful 30-year veteran who had told Voreth about the leak in the first place. "Your intelligence chief has been working with Rithik for over a year," Chen said. Daresh brokered the sealed motion. Daresh provided the financial records not through Toril but from his own access. Toril was the decoy. When the leak was discovered, Daresh pointed you at Toril and then pointed you at us. 2 birds, 1 stone. The human delegation discredited, and you angry enough at the wrong people to walk straight into Rithik's office and accept whatever deal he offered. The silence in the alcove was absolute. Voreth could hear the station's environmental systems cycling somewhere deep in the walls. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the Tenari corridor matters to us," Chen said. "Not the extraction rights. We don't have the infrastructure for mining at that scale yet, and we know it. But the corridor is the primary transit route for 9 species, including ours. If the Gethari take control, they'll levy transit tariffs that will double our shipping costs and functionally lock us out of the Saravan markets. That hurts us. It also hurts the Kravithe, the Olin, the Demikar, and 4 other species who don't have the military weight to push back against Gethari enforcement. So your interest is self-serving. Our interest is aligned with yours and with 6 other delegations. That's not self-serving, that's coalition politics." Voreth looked at her. 47 years. These people had been in interstellar diplomacy for 47 years, and they were sitting in a maintenance alcove laying out the political architecture of a 9-species transit coalition, while his own 30-year intelligence chief had been selling him to the Gethari. What do you propose? Chen leaned forward. A hearing is scheduled in 31 hours. At that hearing, Rithik will present the financial evidence, call for revocation, and force a vote. He has the votes, unless the evidence is challenged on procedural grounds before it reaches the floor. What procedural grounds? The evidence was obtained through a compromised intelligence officer, your own Daresh acting as a covert agent of a foreign delegation. Under Conclave Protocol 17, evidence obtained through undisclosed foreign agents is inadmissible in compact revocation proceedings. If you file a formal complaint identifying Daresh as a Gethari asset before the hearing, the evidence gets quarantined, the hearing gets postponed, and Rithik loses his momentum. I would be publicly admitting that my own intelligence chief was a traitor. Yes, that would humiliate the Tessarine delegation. Less than losing the corridor. Voreth looked at her for a long time. You said you had a plan. Filing a complaint is not a plan, it's a stalling tactic. Harriet Chen smiled. It was a small smile, brief and professional, and it did not look humiliated at all. It looked like the expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this question. The complaint is step 1, she said. There are 6 steps. She laid them out. Each one was precise, practical, and built on the previous step like a load-bearing wall. Step 1. Voreth files the Protocol 17 complaint, naming Daresh, at 600 station time. This quarantines the evidence and postpones the hearing by a minimum of 48 hours while the Conclave's procedural office reviews the complaint. Step 2. During the postponement, the human delegation working through Lena Vasic and the tall man, whose name was Karim Osai, and whose actual role turned out to be forensic data analysis, would compile a parallel financial audit of the Tenari extraction operations, using the data Toral had originally provided. This audit would show the same irregularities the Gethori evidence showed, but would be sourced entirely from cooperative disclosure by the Tessarine delegation itself. Voluntary admission, not espionage. Step 3. Voreth presents the voluntary audit to the Conclave, along with a proposed remediation plan, revised revenue-sharing terms, retroactive payments to the Common Fund, and an independent oversight commission. The message is not denial. The message is accountability. Step 4. While Voreth is presenting accountability to the forum, Karim Osai would be having a quiet conversation with the Kravive Attaché, the Olin Observer, and the Demikar Trade Liaison, presenting them with the transit tariff projections under Gethori control of the corridor. The numbers would speak for themselves. 9 species would see their shipping costs double. The coalition would form not because humans asked, but because the math demanded it. Step 5. The coalition files a counter-motion, proposing a shared oversight model for the corridor, with extraction rights distributed among contributing species proportional to transit volume. The Tessarine retain primary extraction authority, but with transparent reporting and conclave audit access. The motion carries because the votes are there. Step 6. Rithik, outmaneuvered, accepts the new compact rather than forcing a vote he would lose. The Gethori retain transit rights and gain a seat on the Oversight Commission. Everyone saves face. Nobody gets eaten. Voreth listened to all 6 steps. He listened to the contingencies, the timing requirements, the communication protocols, and the fallback positions. He listened to Karim Os explain the forensic data work with the flat, unhurried competence of someone who had done this before and did not need to be impressive about it. He listened to Lena Vasic outline the coalition outreach sequence with the specificity of someone who had already mapped every delegate's pressure points. These were the people he had called performers. "Why should I trust you?" he asked. "You shouldn't," Chen said. "You should trust the plan. Every step is verifiable. Every communication goes through channels you control. Every piece of data we produce, you review before it goes anywhere. If at any point you believe we're working against your interests, you pull the plug and we lose more than you do. We've just revealed our analytical capabilities and our contact network to a Tessarine first consul who has every reason to use that information against us. You're giving me leverage over you. We're aligning incentives. That's what coalition politics looks like. Voreth left the alcove at 1:30 station time. He did not sleep. He spent the remaining hours reviewing every piece of data Chen's team had provided, cross-referencing it against his own records, looking for the trap. He did not find one. At 600, he filed the Protocol 17 complaint. The next 30 hours unfolded with the mechanical precision of a well-maintained clock. Each step executed on schedule, each contingency addressed before it materialized, each conversation happening exactly where and when it needed to happen. Voreth watched the humans work. He had spent his career studying species, reading their social architectures, identifying the invisible structures that govern their behavior. The Tessarine operated on hierarchy and precedent. The Gethori operated on dominance and territory. The Kravithe operated on consensus and obligation. The humans operated on something he had never properly accounted for: adaptability. Not the reactive scrambling of a species caught off guard, but the systematic, deliberate capacity to assess a situation, identify every moving piece, and construct a response from materials at hand. They did not have 1,800 years of institutional memory. They did not have military weight. They did not have extraction infrastructure or transit fleets or the deep cultural gravity that came with centuries of conclave participation. They had 9 people, a maintenance alcove, accurate data, and a plan. Karim Osai's conversation with the Kravithe attaché lasted 14 minutes. The attaché had entered the meeting skeptical and left it making calls. The transit tariff projections were devastating, not because humans had inflated them, but because they were accurate, and the Kravithe had independently verified them inside an hour. Lena Vasik's outreach to the Olin observer was even shorter. The Olin, Voreth learned, had already been running their own projections. They had been waiting for someone to organize the coalition. No one had asked them. The Demikar required more work. Their trade liaison wanted guarantees, specific contractual language, assurances about enforcement mechanisms. OS provided them. The documents were ready before the liaison finished asking. Voreth himself presented the voluntary audit to the forum. He stood where he had stood 3 days earlier in the same silks before the same delegates, and he admitted that the Tessarine extraction operations had underreported yields. He presented the remediation plan. He proposed the shared oversight model. He did not enjoy it. Tessarine diplomats did not admit errors. Admitting errors was, in the social architecture of Tessarine political life, roughly equivalent to running through maintenance corridors in one's ceremonial silks, which Voreth had also recently done. But the response was not what he expected. The forum did not laugh. The Kravithe attaché nodded. The Olin observer signaled assent. 4 other delegations indicated preliminary support before Voreth had finished speaking. Rithik watched from the Gethori bench. His mandibles were still. The countermotion was filed. The votes were counted. The new compact was ratified 16 hours ahead of schedule, because 4 species that had been waiting for an organized coalition found one, and because the math was better than the politics, and because the humans had, apparently, been doing the math while everyone else was doing the politics. Voreth did not see Chen during the ratification. He did not see any of the human delegation. They had 9 people, and all 9 of them had vanished into the procedural machinery of the conclave like coins into a mechanism, each one turning a gear that turned another gear that produced a result. He looked for them afterward. He wanted to say something he was not sure what, but something. An acknowledgement, perhaps, a recalibration of his earlier assessment. That was when Daresh's people tried to kill him. His former intelligence chief, it turned out, had contingencies of his own. When the Protocol 17 complaint was filed, Daresh understood that his arrangement with Rithik was exposed. When the countermotion passed, he understood that his career was over. He also understood that Voreth was the only person who could testify to his involvement in detail sufficient to warrant criminal prosecution under Tessarine law. The solution, from Daresh's perspective, was straightforward. 3 Gethori enforcers, supplied by Rithik as a professional courtesy to a useful asset, intercepted Voreth in the diplomatic quarter at 2200 station time. Voreth's own security detail, which Daresh had managed for 30 years, was conspicuously elsewhere. Voreth ran. The Tessarine diplomat who did not run ran. And now he was following a human woman in a clean maintenance jumpsuit through corridors she knew, and he did not, trusting a species he had dismissed as performers 3 days ago, because the alternative was a plasma bolt through the thorax. Lena Vasic moved through the station's sublevel with the unhurried confidence of someone who had memorized the route. She did not run. She walked at a pace that was brisk but controlled, and she talked as she walked, not to Voreth, but into a communication piece fitted against her jaw. Package is mobile. We're on sublevel 4, corridor 7 Baker. 3 hostiles armed approximately 90 seconds behind. Request Karim at junction 9. A voice in her ear said something Voreth could not hear. She nodded. Ambassador, when we reach the next intersection, there will be a cargo lift on your right. Get in. Hit sublevel 2. Karim will meet you there and take you to the conclave security office. I'm going to stay here. And do what? Slow them down. You are unarmed. I'm a cultural liaison. We don't carry weapons. Then how do you intend to slow 3 armed Gethori enforcers? Vasic reached a panel on the corridor wall and pressed something. Somewhere behind them, a bulkhead hissed and began to close. Not fast. Conclave stations were old, and the emergency bulkheads moved like they had opinions about being woken up, but it would buy time. There are 47 emergency bulkheads between here and docking bay access, she said. I know where all of them are. They don't. The cargo lift was where she said it would be. Voreth stepped in, hit the control for sublevel 2, and watched the doors close on the image of Lena Vasic walking calmly back down the corridor, toward 3 armed enforcers, with nothing but a communication piece and a working knowledge of station infrastructure. Karim Osei was waiting on sublevel 2. He was unhurried. He was holding 2 cups of something hot. Ambassador, he said, offering one of the cups, tea. Voreth took the tea. It was a human beverage. It was adequate. Mr. Osei, there are armed individuals attempting to kill me. Yes, Lena's handling the routing. Station security has been notified. Conclave Protective Services has a team en route. Estimated arrival, 6 minutes. He checked a device on his wrist. Ms. Chen is at the procedural office filing emergency protective orders against Commandant Rithik and former intelligence chief Daresh. The filing includes the communication logs between Daresh and Gethori intelligence, which we've had authenticated by an independent cryptographic authority. You prepared for this. We prepared for several possibilities. This was contingency 4. Out of how many? Osei took a sip of his tea. 11. They walked to the conclave security office. Voreth drank the tea. It was, on reflection, better than adequate. They arrived to find conclave protective services already assembling. The Gethori enforcers were intercepted on sublevel 4, where they had managed to get through 2 of Vasic's 47 bulkheads before station security cornered them. Vasic herself arrived at the security office 12 minutes later, completely unruffled, and asked if there was more tea. Rithik was placed under conclave diplomatic sanction the following morning. Daresh was detained by Tessarine authorities within the hour, transported under conclave escort to a Tessarine judicial vessel. The evidence against both was comprehensive, cross-referenced, and annotated with the kind of meticulous documentation that suggested someone had been building the case for weeks. They had been. The humans had been building it since before Vorath gave his speech in the Grand Forum. Since before the conclave session began. Since Vorath eventually learned, approximately 4 months ago, when a junior analyst named Toril had contacted the Earth Diplomatic Service with concerns about irregularities in Tessarine extraction reporting, and an intelligence chief who seemed to be holding private meetings with Gethori operatives. The humans had known about Daresh before Vorath did. They had known about Rithik's plan before Rithik filed the sealed motion. They had come to the conclave not as performers stumbling through a script they did not understand, but as the only delegation in the forum that had an accurate picture of what was actually happening. And when Vorath had stood before the assembled delegates and called them a provincial dinner theater, Harriet Chen had sat in her chair and waited, because the plan did not require his respect. It only required that events proceed as they had modeled, which they did, step by step, contingency by contingency, all the way through to the moment when a Tessarine first consul who had never run in 11 years found himself sprinting through maintenance corridors, trusting humans with his life, because they were the only ones who had been paying attention. Vorath found Harriet Chen in the conclave's public gallery the following day. She was sitting alone, reading something on a datapad, wearing the same unremarkable civilian attire. She did not look up when he approached. "Ms. Chen." "Ambassador." He sat down. This was, for a Tessarine diplomat, an act of considerable significance. Tessarine did not sit with people of lower station. The act of sitting implied equivalence. "I owe you an acknowledgement," he said. "You don't owe me anything. The compact was ratified. The corridor is stable. Our shipping costs stay manageable. That's the outcome we needed. Nevertheless, I misjudged your delegation. The remarks in the forum were inaccurate." Chen set down her datapad. She looked at him with the same expression she had worn throughout the one he had spent 3 days misreading. It was not humiliation. It was not patience. It was the expression of someone who had already moved past the insult because the insult was not relevant to the work. "Ambassador, we've been doing interstellar diplomacy for 47 years. In that time, we've been dismissed by the Tessarine, patronized by the Kravath, ignored by the Olin, and threatened by the Gethori. Every session, every cycle, and every session we show up with 9 people and accurate data, and the willingness to do the work that no one else wants to do because it's not glamorous enough for species with 1,800 years of institutional prestige." She picked her datapad back up. "You know what we don't do? We don't give speeches about it." Vorath sat with that for a moment. "The dinner theater comparison," he said, "it was unworthy." "It was a good line," Chen said without looking up. "Landed well, got the laugh. But you might consider, Ambassador, that the best performers are the ones who make it look effortless. And we're not performing." She went back to her reading. Vorath sat beside her for another minute, in the quiet of the public gallery, with the orbital window casting pale light across both of them, and then he stood and smoothed his silks and walked back to the Tessarine delegation offices. He had a revised compact to implement. The Tessarine extraction reports would need to be restructured for transparency. New oversight protocols would need to be negotiated. There would be hearings, audits, adjustments, the tedious, essential machinery of accountability. He also had a call to make. When Harriet Chen answered, her expression was the same as always. Vorath had finally stopped trying to read it as anything other than what it was, the face of someone who was already working on the next problem. "Ms. Chen, The Tessarine delegation would like to formally request a bilateral consultation with the Earth Diplomatic Service regarding the implementation of the new corridor oversight framework. We'd be glad to. I should note that this is not a subcommittee referral. This is a direct consultation between principal delegations, as equals. A pause, brief but present. We'll have our team there in the morning, Ambassador. 9 people. 9 is what we have. It appears, Vorath said, to be enough. He ended the call. Through the window of his office, Conclave Station turned slowly against the stars, and somewhere in the levels below, a human woman in a maintenance jumpsuit was probably still asking if there was more tea.